Say, can you
Okay, so
Turn your mic up.
turn your mic. So now that we have the mic settled out, and if there's anyone trying to watch this meeting, we do apologize, but we've had a great deal of difficulty with microphones. So good evening and welcome to the Township of West Lincoln Special Council meeting this evening. It's meeting number 8, and today is Monday, April 29th. This is a workshop format, so fortunately it's very informal and it's a good thing. So I'm going to begin with the land acknowledgement statement, and then we'll move to disclosures, and then right away our appointment starts. So bear with this land acknowledgement. Hopefully the microphones continue to work properly. The Township of West Lincoln, being part of Niagara Region, is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Haudenosaunee, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The Township of West Lincoln, as part of the Regional Municipality of Niagara, stands with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. So, councillors, I'm going to ask if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest and/or conflict of interest. And seeing none, we are going to move right away to our presentations, and our appointment this evening is Byron Tan from Watson and Associates Economics, pardon me, Limited. So this is a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully the technology continues to work. I did ask Byron before, councillors, about whether he wanted to go through his entire presentation and then accept questions, but he tells me that there are some breaks along the way in certain parts. So if you have questions about the break, the area that he's just presented, feel free to raise your hand or ask your questions at that time. And then he'll move on to the next portion and so on. And then still, of course, at the end, there'll be an opportunity for further questions. So with that, while things are still working, Byron, welcome to West Lincoln Council. Thank you for the work that you've done already with our staff in terms of presentation on this, and thank you for presenting to council tonight.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction. Just mic check, everyone could hear me.
Okay,
Yes?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you for that, Your Worship. Again, my name is Byron Tan. I'm a manager at Watson and Associates Economists Limited. I've been tasked by the township to undertake your 2024 Development Charger Background Study, and I am here tonight to provide you with a presentation of, the almost like a DC 101, so kind of providing you with the steps of the Development Charge Background Study, some legislative changes that have occurred, both over the past few years, and then potentially what may be coming up, in the near future. And then as well providing you with a little bit of an overview of the process that has been undertaken so far, some of the engagement that we've had with the development community, and then the next steps really going into the draft calculations, and then looking at the implementation of your new bylaw, which is set to expire this summer. So with that being said, as you can see on the screen, I do have a presentation prepared. Again, there's multiple different topics on here. There may be some topics that I'll go a little bit more briefly because, again, the presentation's here in front of you. You're more than happy to refer to it at a later date. But, there are some items that I would like to walk council through, as well as the members of the public, so that you can see exactly how the process, is initiated, how we come about with the development charges, without going too much into the gory details of the calculations and all the minutia of, the dollars and cents. So with that being said, the purpose of the presentation will really to provide you with a timeline and overview of the process. We'll talk about, again, the overview of the methodology of the development charges, what has transpired with the Development Charges Act. Again, really dating back over a few years now, because most recently there have been a number of bills that were passed that made amendments to the Development Charge Act, and most of them we actually took care of in your prior DC study when we did your DC update. And then following that, we'll go through some of your current charges, your current policies, as well as perhaps proposed policies to be included as part of your draft bylaw that will be included as part of the background study. And then we'll talk about your draft findings to date. So we do have a draft growth forecast prepared, draft capital, The presentation itself doesn't have all the specifics of every single capital item, but I believe that was circulated to everyone here so you could see the specifics by service. I will have a cursory overview of the capital at a high level, though. And then we'll go through the draft rates as calculated. Again, through our discussions, with the township staff and then any comments that we may receive from the development community, these rates may be subject to change, but for now, these are the draft findings as the calculations stand today. And then finally, we'll go through a survey of comparators between yourself and other municipalities within Niagara region. Obviously, the best way to compare is how you compare with your neighbors. And from there, you'll be able to see where you currently are, where the draft calculations are going relative to everyone else that is still going through this process or where they currently are today. And again, we'll talk about next steps and then questions, but while I do have questions at the end, feel free to ask anything, perhaps, after every subsection before we go on. So with that being said, the overview of the process, right now we're looking at, we started the process with the township back in July of 2023. Now, needless to say, we did work with the township back in 2022 to update the background study to incorporate a lot of the legislative changes that came about post-2019. So we were tasked to, undertake that process, so we're very familiar with the information as well as the infrastructure required within the township. And that just led to fruitful discussions dating back from July 2023 to April 2024. So really it was an extended period of staff review, back and forths, doing the calculations, policy work, et cetera. In mid-April, so on April 18th, we did meet with the development community to provide them with a similar presentation that I'm providing you now, a little bit more pointed to some of the more details of the calculations rather than this overarching council workshop type of style. But we did gain, a lot of their feedback. There were some questions back and forth and getting their comments. So, we are taking that into consideration when finalizing the study process over the coming weeks. We are here today to undertake the council workshop, and we are looking to finalize and release the background study on May 13th of, this coming month. Subsequent to that, we are looking to schedule and conduct the mandatory public meeting under the Development Charge Act on May 27th. I believe there may be some council meetings in June just to talk about policies to incorporate as part of the draft bylaw. But really, at the end of the day, we will be back here on July 15th to seek council's consideration of the bylaw in order for you to continue collecting development charges. So, with that being said, again, just kind of want to provide members of council, members of the public, a little bit of an overview of, what development charges are. Some of you may have lived through it from your previous bylaw. Some may be new to it. But essentially, the motto is, growth. Growth should pay for a portion of growth. So, or to the extent possible. So, in this case here, the purpose of development charges is to recover growth-related capital costs associated with residential and non-residential development. And this is new development that'll come into a municipality. These costs would typically include capital that would be above and beyond what you would require a localized subdivision to construct, pay for, and then you would assume later on at a future date. So this is above and beyond anything that's more localized servicing. So again, within their subdivision agreements, you may require developments to construct the internal roads, and internal water mains, sewers, sidewalks, stormwater, etc. So development charges really are more for the broader area and more external works where possible, or at least enhanced works that wouldn't just be site-specific. Typically, development charges are paid at the time prior to receiving a building permit, but there are opportunities where developers, as well as the municipalities, can enter into agreements, whether it's a prepayment agreement where they would pay ahead of time prior to a building permit, or even late payment agreements where they can pay, afterwards. Again, these would all have to be documented, but there is a mechanism to do that. But typically, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, DCs are payable at the time of building permit issuance. And development charges are not mandatory. Municipalities are empowered to impose them through bylaw under the Development Charge Act, and you must go through the processes to do so. But at the end of the day, you do have the ability to elect whether you want to have them or not. Now, with that being said, if you take a look at the next slide, there is a little bit of a relationship to having development charges relative to the type of growth or the type of infrastructure you wish to construct. So if you take a look at the schematic here, if you were to, have new population, new development, then, you need services to be able to service that growth. And those services really, at the end of the day, can be funded from a few sources, within the municipality's powers. You can either not have development charges, but then you would have to utilize, water sewer rates, property taxes, user fees, maybe use your reserves, anything on the existing end, or any other municipal revenue tools that you have at your disposal. Now, this is where, again, the left-hand side of the triangle here goes, where if you do have development charges, then it assists with providing the recovery of revenues towards that new infrastructure by alleviating some of the costs, especially on the existing residents and businesses, for them having to pay for property taxes or water and sewer rates in order to build new infrastructure. So again, it's just another revenue tool in order to not increase your existing burdens. Sorry about that. So really, when it comes to development charges, we go through a process of trying to identify what inputs go within the background study. So at a high level, we take a look at, from before we even go through the capital and go through, really including what we need to recover, we need to identify the growth and development. And that's typically working with the planning staff or any known planning documents to really set the framework as to what would be the basis for our growth, and as well as the future capital. So we typically look at planning documents such as your official plan, maybe some zoning, maybe some secondary plans, etc. So once we establish the official plan, whether it's at the township level or in your case in a two-tiered system with the region providing OP targets for you, then we take a look at, we go down then from 30,000 feet going down to say 20,000 to 10 to 20,000 feet. And then we look at master plans, more overarching plans that identify, areas within the municipality that, have growth or some type of development and have identified, at least at a high level, the type of servicing that's required. And, for example, with respect to this study, we relied heavily on the Smithville Master Community Plan, which again really dictated a lot of the servicing requirements that informed the background study, as well as the capital program that you may have seen already. And then finally, once we take a look at those master plans, then we have the discussion with staff, of the master plan. What is the most likely scenario to be undertaken? And those are the projects that we include within the background study. So even though the master plan may identify every single project, at the end of the day, it's the township staff and then as well as the municipality to really outline, well, what do you want to proceed with at the end of the day? And what you're proceeding with, or at least what you'd like to look at, from a forward-looking analysis, is what we would include in the development charge background study. So there is still, it's not just a blanket, copy-paste. We do have to go through a lot of those rigors to ensure that we are including the appropriate capital. So with that being said, at a high level, really, in order to calculate the DCs, and I'll go through it later on in the methodology, but, really in the simplified schematic, we take a look at the cost of infrastructure required to accommodate growth. And again, this includes, just pure capital. So we cannot include operating. It's only the capital costs related to infrastructure that is directly tied to the growth needs. And then from there, we take a look at the growth forecast that was identified, and we divide the two. So really, the cost is your numerator, and then the growth forecast is your denominator to get a charge. And that charge, at a simplified level, is typically broken down into two categories: residential, non-residential. From a residential standpoint, we typically look at it on cost per unit. And that unit type is typically broken down between singles, semis, townhouses, so your multiples, and then you have your apartments, whether it's the larger apartments, 2 bedrooms plus, which have a little bit more people in them, versus say a 1-bedroom or studio apartment, which, since there's not that many people, maybe their charge will be lower relative to a single family home. And then With respect to the non-residential, it's typically done on a per square foot basis. So if you have a new factory or a new business coming into place, then typically the development charge would be based on the square footage that they would be anticipated to be constructed. So that's how the development charge is typically applied and calculated. Now, in terms of the methodology, what you're seeing on the screen, there's about 6 steps here. But I would advise that, again, this is a simplified version of the Development Charge Act. The Act has over 80 clauses and hundreds of subclauses, which makes for great reading if you, ever have insomnia. But joking aside, right now what you're seeing on your screen here is a summarized version of the steps. So as I mentioned earlier, with the methodology, we identify the amount, type, and location of growth. So again, that's, through the work identified, through the planning process, whether it's through the planning documents, working with planning staff, such as Mrs. Treble, or again, any other information that we can glean on, perhaps even the regional documents as well. Once we identify the amount, type, and location of growth, then we take a look at the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. Again, similar to looking at that Smithville master plan. So while the servicing needs then dictate, okay, well, for example, if we're growing by 20,000 people, well, maybe perhaps for every 1,000 people, we need X amount of playgrounds or X amount of parks and recreation needs and programming. So that's saying from a servicing standpoint, we have a service that we'd like to provide based on the growth forecast. Number 3 then takes that more granular and say, all right, well, since we know we have to provide servicing, what types of projects do we need in order to provide that service? So while we do need parks and recreation, number 3 then says, well, what type would you like? Would you like a playground? Would you like a splash pad? Would you like, a swing and slide? Would you like an outdoor turf? So really it's more a specific capital to meet the servicing needs, which is parks and recreation. Then we go on to deduct a number of items once we identify these costs. So, with the legislation, there's a number of requirements where even though it's growth related, there's a number of items that still need to be deducted at the end of the day. And, the 4 main ones are grants, subsidies, and other contributions. So if you're receiving grant monies or someone else is providing you monies to help pay for that asset, then really those funds should really be deducted off of the capital cost because you're already receiving money from somewhere else. The next one is benefit to existing development. So we do go through every single capital with staff to determine if there is a benefit to the existing community for that particular work. I'll give you an example. Let's say you had a 5,000 square foot fire station. You wanted to go up, say, to a 10,000 square foot fire station, and you want to get rid of that existing 5. Well, you already had an existing 5,000 square feet. So really what you're adding to the community is an additional 5,000. So that first 5,000 square feet of that new fire station would be a benefit to the existing community because you already had it. So really it's just the incremental portion of the growth of that building that would be considered DCable. Hence, if that was the case, then it would be a 50-50, 50% growth, 50% non-growth on that capital item. Now, the third one is the amount in excess of the 15-year historical service standard calculation. So what that means is, again, you'll probably see this through the calculations within the background study, but as part of the analysis for every service except for water, wastewater, and storm, we have to undertake what's called a service standard calculation. And what that is, it takes a look at what the municipality has provided over the last 15 years in terms of inventory and calculate a replacement cost based on, today's replacement cost or today's market value. If you had to replace it like for like today, what would that be? And we do this every year for 15 years. Now, what the Act then says is what you want to provide in the future can be no higher than the average you've provided in the past. So when we do that 15-year calculation, we take a look at the average level of service that you've provided. And again, it's on a per capita basis for the most part. And we take that average and multiply it by the growth forecast. I know that's a mouthful there, but essentially what it's saying is if you only provided, $200 per capita over the last, 15 years, then if you are growing by, say, 1,000 people, then really it's $200 times that 1,000, and that dollar amount is really what you can collect for in the future. So essentially, in that case, $200,000. And that's the ceiling that we cannot exceed. And we do that same calculation for every service, as I said, except for water, wastewater, and storm. Now, and lastly, DC reserve funds. From one bylaw to the other, for most municipalities, such as yourselves, you would have collected monies, right, from development charges. So at one point in time, if you do have any surpluses in your reserve funds, then those amounts should then be applied to the capital sheets, and that amount is reduced from the calculations, because you've already collected that money. Likewise, if you have a deficit, then that means you've spent the money ahead of time and you need to pay yourself back for investing from the growth that has occurred over that past period. And if that's the case, then you should be allowed to recover that deficit. So it works both ways. If you have a surplus, then you reduce it from the capital costs. If you have a deficit, you include that as part of a recovery. Now, once you have a net capital cost, then you then divide that, or allocate it, I should say, between residential and non-residential growth. And typically, we usually look at population to employment. Sometimes we look at allocation. So there's a number of ways to allocate growth. But again, at a high level, typically it's population to employment. And then from there, we then divide it by the growth forecast. So once we allocate costs to the residential, whatever your growth forecast is in residential, we divide that number to get your DCs. So in terms of the DC eligible services, what you're seeing on the screen here, this was updated back in 2020 when Bill 197 came out. And really what it said was there's only a set amount of services that we can collect for under the Development Charge Act. So you're seeing the list of 19 here. It used to be 20. However, one of the services with respect to housing was actually removed as part of Bill 23. So that's why you're no longer seeing it here. It does not affect the township per se, but the region used to collect for housing development charges. So that has now been removed, and therefore what you're seeing here is what we're left with. Now, extending off of this, anything that you're seeing in this dark blue, teal type color, these are the services that we are including for recovery, or at least being examined as part of the background study. So for now, and these are the same services that you had provided for recent, in your previous bylaw. So we are continuing with water, wastewater, storm, services related to highway, which is really your roads, public works, facilities and fleet, et cetera. And then parks, fire protection, library, and parks and recreation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is that 15-year level of service ceiling that we have to adhere to. So this slide here simply just demonstrates the what I had mentioned earlier, where the service standards provide that ceiling that we cannot exceed. And as I said, it doesn't apply to water, wastewater, storm, and again transit. But again, I didn't speak to that because it's not applicable for you. It's more on the regional side. Now, in terms of capital costs, so now that we've established a historical inventory that basically provides a ceiling, we can then go through and identify the capital that we will be including as part of the calculations. So really, this listing here provides a summary of what can be included in terms of recovery. So I do have acquire land or interest in land highlighted. It is still allowable as of right now. However, I would note that Bill 23 back in 2022 did provide basically a policy, a revision to the act that essentially said that there will be land will no longer be eligible for certain services as identified as prescribed by the province and by the minister. Well, there was no prescribed service. There were no prescribed services that were released for which land would be exempt. So until that bulletin or that regulation comes out, we are still including land costs until we're told otherwise. So that's why it's still on here, even though it is highlighted. We can improve land. So for example, if you had, let's say, parkland that you either acquired through parkland dedication or you purchased it yourself via your dedication clauses through the Planning Act under Section 42, 51, and 53, then you are allowed to utilize development charge funds to improve that land. So you could, once you have that land, then you can seed it, sod it, fence it, again, get it to a programmable level that you can actually include amenities, such as playgrounds, et cetera, all of which are DC eligible. However, I would just note that, while you are allowed to acquire land under the development charges, you just can't acquire parkland because you have those powers through the Planning Act. So then the third bullet then says you can acquire, lease, and construct or improve buildings, facilities, and structures, including the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So as I said, if you're building a new fire station, building a new public works yard, etc., those are all eligible to be DC items. As well, you can see here you can acquire or lease. So you don't have to own the building itself too, but if you are acquiring a building or leasing that you're providing services out of, then you are still, then at the end of the day, it's no different than if whether you owned it. So we can include the capital component of those leases within the development charges. You can include equipment and rolling stock. So again, equipment and vehicles, as long as it meets a useful life of 7 years or longer. So those are more, again, the higher order type of capital for vehicles and equipment, then that is all eligible as well within the development charges. I did mention again with the lease, so it's the capital component of the lease above, and then for libraries too, circulation materials. Again, libraries aren't very good unless there's, materials for you to utilize, so we can include that as well as part of the development charges. I would note, as per Bill 23, studies as well as the background study are no longer eligible, for DC capital cost inclusions. However, I would put an asterisk here because, there are some potential changes on the horizon that may affect this, this exclusion. And then lastly, if you did have to go debt finance and, have any debt with respect to any of the above, we can include those costs as part of a DC recovery. So, and I believe, you do have a few with respect to your West Lincoln Community Center, amongst other facilities. So we are including those debt payments as well as part of the capital recovery, as well as the interest associated with it. In terms of extending off of the capital costs, we can use any planning horizon for the services, except for transit, which again is limited to 10 years, but we don't have to worry about it for this study. I already mentioned that the capital costs must be reduced by grants, subsidies, other contributions. And the third one is may include authorized costs incurred or proposed to be incurred by others on behalf of the municipality. So the include authorized costs, obviously this is the low-hanging fruit. If you have it within your capital budgets, council's already approved it, that's easy enough to include within the background study. Now, the second part where it says proposed to be incurred, the background study spans years. We go either 10 years or to 2051, which is basically, call it 27 years. So council has not turned their minds to those projects that are in years, 10 to 27. So they are proposed to be incurred. So we are allowed to include that within the DC study. Now it's just up to staff to provide council with a budget, with the capital approvals at the beginning of the year through your budget process to actually get those capital items approved, prior to construction or purchases. So we can include the proposed piece, even though they're not part of your capital project yet, but it is through the master plans or any other type of documents. Now, the second part there, the proposed to be incurred by others on behalf of the municipality local board. So you don't have to actually have the facility located within West Lincoln or own it yourself. If you have any cost-sharing agreements where, let's say, for example, some municipalities, they may share fire services, or they may share, public works, snow removal, where another municipality will take care of your assets, then your capital cost that you're providing to them for that municipality to provide the services to you could still be DC eligible, because at the end of the day, you're still providing the service, you're just asking another provider to do it on your behalf. So you don't have to actually do it yourselves. It could be done on behalf of the municipality. And then, as I mentioned, there are some capital costs that we cannot include. I already talked about the parkland acquisition. The useful life needs to be 7 years or longer. The third one is computer equipment that's not integral to the delivery of the service. So, for example, if there's any computer equipment, let's say that's more administrative or, for finance, or again, let's say in the library example, it'd be more for the CEO or the librarian to use for their administrative work, that would not be DCable. But if it's computer equipment that's integral to the service, whether it's, a computer, GPS, so that, the firefighters know exactly where they're driving to in their trucks to get to the location, or even the, the equipment that will be out in the public, let's say for patrons to use, let's say in the library example, that would be DC eligible. Again, we do draw the line as to what equipment would be eligible versus not. And then I already talked about the studies and then the removal of land. So I'd like to pause there before I move on to the changes to the Act. Were there any questions, at least for that first bit?
Okay, so let's take that to members of council. This is the first little bit of a break in a session. Any councilors in chambers that have questions? Okay, go ahead, Councilor Ryder.
Thank you, Mayor, through you to, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
Byron's fine.
Sorry, thank you, Byron.
Yeah.
You had pulled up a screen about eligible services for developmental charges, and there was a whole big list, and I believe you had a few that were highlighted in a nice
Yep.
teal color. And when I look at, how many years our growth is projected for, does this list, can it ebb and flow, or just kind of explain to me why the ones in teal are teal?
Yeah, great question. Through the mayor, really we were continuing on existing services that you already collect for. We did have a discussion with staff, if there were any other services to explore, but as of right now, to simply add a service without doing any background work or having any master plans or any type of, capital to support some of the other services, I think would be immature, or at least premature to include as part of the background study. So as of right now, we do have information with these ones that are noted in teal, and again, these were extended off of your past development charge studies. So it was the low-hanging fruit to continue on because these are the main infrastructure servicing that is required for the township, not only in the 10-year, but also going up to 2051.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Councilor Chichon.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. These are the entire basket of charges that could be charged anywhere in Ontario. That's why you have the Toronto-York subway extension there,
Through the mayor, that's correct.
and the airport, et cetera. Okay, so the electrical power services, I just want to make sure I understand why it's there.
Through the mayor, a great question. So historically, the development charges.
They used to allow them in 1999.
Yes.
Hospitals as well, and I want that question, that was one of my questions, because people who are listening to this out there
Yeah.
still believe that we charge in development charges for hospitals as well as hydro
Yeah.
or electrical services. So now that you have it there, I really want you to explain it so it'll be there for the people out there.
Yes. Through the mayor, great question. I mean, right now, based on how the act reads, it does still include it as an item, as an eligible service. However, there's very few municipalities within Ontario that actually have their own electrical power services. So there may be some that may be more in the northern areas where, it's not, the larger entities such as your Hydro One or Niagara Power or whomever, Bruce Power, where really they're not the municipal, services anymore. They're more of this, corporate entities. So really, if you are under that type of structure, then really this here is not applied to you because you are not the one providing that electrical power. It's another entity. I understand, I believe within Niagara region, most of the municipalities here probably sold off a lot of their, their, electrical, shares, and right now you just get, let's say, a dividend or something from the, from the power authorities that would be in the area. So at the end of the day, while it is here, right now in my 11 years at Watson, I've yet to find one bylaw that actually collects for electrical power services.
So right now, being very clear, in 1999, when the development charges went under review, under our great friend Mike Harris, and who does what happened, electrical and and hospitals were removed from the development charges in most of Ontario, including Niagara.
That's through the mayor. That's correct. I've not seen a bylaw right now. Again, at least from my experience of working 11 years, that included the electrical power as a recovery.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Now that we've got that on record,
Yeah.
I just don't want people to be saying, why am I? Why are we paying for a hospital? Why? So I'm sorry for looking for that clarity, but thank you. You had mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation that the developers had a look at the presentation, but a much more intense presentation than we have. Have they seen the background study that is today's? Because they do have to do their evaluation. And I have heard from developers that, we're getting no time to look at this. So I also want on the record, they saw the background study in its entirety at that date.
Through the mayor, we have not actually released a background study yet. So what we had provided, again, similar to your presentation with, again, probably less of the information slides, but we did provide them with a listing of the capital sheets, as well as having that, open conversation for about a couple of hours. And then we did request that, they take that away, and then if there's any comments, please feel free to let us know over the coming week or two, because we are aiming to release the background study on May 13th.
Yes. So, just for clarity, through you, Madam Mayor, they have enough that they could give to their economists so they can do their basic analysis, and they can look at the fundamental analysis and calculations that you've done.
Through the mayor, I'm not sure how they would do their calculations, but we did provide them all of the capital as well as the draft rates as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why would any municipality in today's day and age, through you, Madam Mayor, why would any municipality in this high-interest, low DCs compared to years ago, why would they push off the DCs to be on the building permit? Is that for, are we talking not-for-profits or something, some special category, but not a developer per se, or what is it for?
So, through the mayor, great question. Typically, when we do a delayed payment agreement where they wouldn't pay at the time of building permit, again, most of those type of agreements are actually locking in the rates as of today. You're just allowing them to pay them, either 2 years from now or however long you decide to enter into that late payment agreement. So typically, it wouldn't be whatever the rates would be prevailing at that time, 2 years, 3 years from now. You're actually locking in today. You're just allowing them to pay, at a later date.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, but my question would be, considering municipalities are reaching their debt ceilings and development charges have been reduced, can you give me an example of where you've seen a DC being collected so much later when the cost of borrowing is entering into the equation? That was really my point.
Gotcha.
Sorry, it's a blonde question.
No, thank you for that. So through the mayor, so with respect to that, there are a few items which I'll probably talk about later on that actually require a municipality to enter into those late payment agreements because the act dictates that you have to. So, for example, as of right now, if a developer were to come in with a site, a completed site plan application or a zoning bylaw amendment, then the rates that would have been effective as of that time would be frozen for a period up to 2 years. So at that point, they can pull a building permit up until, again, that 2-year window, but pay the rates as if they were calculated at the time when they submitted that application. So in that instance, you have no choice. You have to do it for them. Now, there are some as well where I have seen simply depending on the initiatives of the council of the day, maybe you'll extend a delayed payment agreement maybe to a non-residential, because you want them to be able to come in and then as they're starting up, maybe allow them to pay their DCs at a later date, maybe a year from now, just to be able to at least alleviate some of their startup costs. Whatever the impetus may be, it's different across the board, but my first example is mandatory.
Thank you. One more, Madam Mayor, and given that there's thank you, I hear you, and we might want to exempt not-for-profits, or if we want to get specific types of housing or whatever, but some of that may actually require us to give a grant, just so as not to disrupt the development charges, which I know other municipalities have done. You collect the entirety and then give a grant out later. Okay, I know that this is all stuff, I'm just looking at what you're saying, and I'm just predicting what people outside this building are hearing with what's going on right now. Mm-hmm. And development charges have changed, and they may again with Bill 185. But so the 15-year service average is actually reducing in most cases the service levels that you have. If you have to go back 15 years, and average that out, it used to be 10. So things that were, if you had nothing in place for those 5 years before, like West Lincoln, I look at our recreation center. We have to go back 15 years. When we built it, it was only 10 years, which meant that our service level was actually 10-year average. Now that it's 15, that facility, while it has excess capacity, and I'm not trying to be a smart aleck here.
No,
I just suffered it when we built that thing. And beautiful place, wonderful place, and used by all. But now our service level is actually diminished because we have to average what we spent 15 years ago up until today. And that wonderful building now is a service level of our average of zeros for 5 years before the 10-year threshold. So we actually have a reduced ceiling on some of our recreational facilities if we were to ever think of building something else. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, that's a great observation, that actually, that does occur with municipalities that have, as you say, undertook a large, capital undertaking, which then came into service, which would then bump up your level of service. And as you said, if you're only looking at a 10-year, then you were at that higher level of service for a 10-year period. Going back an additional 5, where you didn't have that building in place, then you are looking at a lower amount because it would have been whatever the existing facility was divided by your population. So that is how we undertake the calculations.
That's the law,
Yes.
not just how you do it.
No, sorry, yes, that is
I
how
want
the
it clear
act.
that we didn't pick someone who penalized us.
Yes, that's correct. That is how the act, requires us to undertake those.
So really, we should go out and borrow money and build new recreation facilities, bump up our recreation facilities, and we'll have a higher level of service. All right, I think I'll wait for the next break. I'm glad to have those questions answered, but sorry for the answers. Thank you. And sorry for the question.
Okay, so, Donna, did you want to weigh in before we go to the rest of the councilors? Okay, so I haven't forgotten those of you who are sitting in online. Our new interim CAO, former Director of Finance, still in that role a great deal, wanted to weigh in a little bit on some of that discussion. And then I'll come back to those of you who may have questions online.
Thank you, Mayor Ganan. The one thing, Byron, and I think for us, though, our current background study would not have had the rec center. So I think we actually benefit from this background study that you're working on, because I think the service, now we have the new rec center. I don't have it in front of me, but it wasn't included in our... No, it wasn't included as a service. It was not included in the service, I forget what you call it. I don't think, standard.
Community center bill?
It would have been before COVID, just opened 2019, okay.
2018,
Yeah.
the library portion open.
19.
2018.
So through the mayor, that's a great observation. Because your community center was really activated and, part of your service standard really around the 2019 mark, your previous development charge study would not have included it in your, your 10-year service standards. And if it did, maybe it was only 1 year's worth. So now you are getting about 5 years worth of the service standard. So yes, if we still did not have the first 5 years of that 15 years, you probably would have had a higher service standard ceiling. But overall, it is still increasing by having that. But to your point, Councillor, yes, having that extra 5 years doesn't, does have a downward pressure by having that.
Okay, thank you. You're both finished now? Okay, so Councillor Riley, Trombetta, or Rayner, do any of you have a question?
Not really, everything's been covered that I was going to ask, so thanks, though.
Okay. Councillor Trombetta, are you okay? Okay, I presume that they would be on.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, and Councillor Rayner, a question from you, sir, or no?
No, it's not, we're having trouble here, it's so unclear, I can hardly make out, I think it was Councilor Chichok that was speaking earlier, but it's so inaudible and muffled, I can't even make out what he's saying.
Okay, well, we'll try to improve upon that. Could you hear Byron when he was doing his presentation? Because we're going back to that.
Yeah, but it was a little muffled too, but it was not as bad as when the members of council were starting to speak. It got worse, and it was almost to the point where I couldn't make out exactly what you were saying at all.
Okay, well, thank you for that input. We're going back to Byron to let him continue, so hopefully that's a little more clear for you.
All right, thank you.
All right. So the next portion of the presentation just talks about the changes to the Development Charge Act. Again, this is more, changes to the legislation, so I may couple this with the next section as well because it's fairly brief. So as, most of you know that probably have gone through a development charge bylaw. Development charges are not new. They've been around actually since its first iteration back in the 1950s through the Planning Act under lot levies. It wasn't until the late 80s where the province actually introduced a separate Development Charge Act, which again had a number of policies and number of rules that must be incorporated. And then it wasn't until 1997 where they released the current iteration of the Development Charge Act that we are living and breathing through today. And that was actually took it into effect, I believe, in 1999. So with that being said, there's been a number of revisions to the Act through about 8 different bills. And you can see that on the right-hand side of the screen here. So Bill 73, Bill 108, 138, 197, so all of M213, those bills right there would have been incorporated as part of your previous development charge bylaw, as well as the update that our firm actually assisted with the township a couple of years ago. So that really incorporated a number of, timing of payments, some of those rate freezes that I was speaking of during the question and answer period, as well as some other items which I'll just touch upon in the next slide. And then most recently, as most of you know, we had Bill 23. So that was a large, there was a large sweeping changes to the Act that really reduced the development charge recoveries that would be allowable via municipalities bylaw. And then Bill 134, that was more supplementary to Bill 23, which provided additional income qualifiers to some of the exemptions that I'll talk about in a minute that were introduced as part of Bill 23. And then what I have highlighted is Bill 185. Again, this is not, it hasn't received royal assent, it's not in effect yet, but it is proposed. So I did wanted to put it here and then bring council and members of the public at least apprised of, what is potentially coming out of that bill. So in terms of the recent changes to the legislation, again, I'll touch upon this briefly. Your current bylaw already incorporates most of these, at least up to Bill 109. But essentially, Bill 108, that introduced timing of payment provisions. So as I mentioned earlier, you do have that rate freeze. So if I have a site plan application or zoning, you freeze the DCs for a period of 2 years. As well, it introduced annual payment installments for certain developments. So for example, if you're a rental or institutional, you're actually allowed to pay 6 installments over 5 years. So that was something that you must provide. Now, in addition to that, you are allowed to include interest costs. So, with respect to the annual payments or that rate freeze, you are allowed to apply interest to at least alleviate some of the costs of borrowing that you may have if you had to, undertake a capital item but still had to wait for these, these freezes or the installment payments. In terms of Bill 138, that was a minor change where it actually removed commercial and industrial from the annual payment limits. So again, they were part of that rental and institutional that could pay over 6 payments or 5 years. So that was removed, so that way now commercial and industrial just pay one time. Bill 197, so that was a large one. So that introduced, as you saw in that previous slide, a list of services that can now be included. So historically, the Development Charge Act included items that you could not recover for, but then they changed it from an exclusionary list to an inclusionary list. And as you may know from, say dealing in your personal lives through insurance, when you have something that's exclusionary, then it's a little bit open to interpretation of what could be included as part of the coverage. Well, in this case here, since it's included, it's an inclusionary list, you must fit within this framework. So unless the service is noted there, then really that's, then you cannot include it as a DC recovery. And then with Bill 213, so that was a change actually not of the Development Charge Act, but it was changes to the Universities and Colleges Acts. So essentially what this allows for is that any developments within a land that is really for universities, so if they receive operating funds from higher levels of government, then any developments on those lands would be exempt from development charges. So again, it's through a different act, but then directly provides that exemption. Bill 109, I mean, that was more of a change for reporting requirements. So really, this is now for the finance staff, in order to actually undertake further reporting requirements that they must submit to the ministry. And then we all know Bill 23 and then Bill 134. I'll talk about that, require slides on their own, so I'll provide that in the subsequent slides. So in terms of Bill 23, it was actually introduced, again, just to go through this briefly, it was introduced back on October 25th, 2022. And basically within a month and call it 4 days, assuming, there's 31 days in October, it was passed essentially on November 28th. So very quick turnaround on having the bill first read to receiving royal assent. There was a number of pieces of legislation that was affected through that act, about 9. Obviously, the most notable ones were the Development Charge Act and the Planning Act. The changes really had an impact to the DCs, community benefit charges for those that do have that type of revenue source, and then parkland dedication. Excuse me. And really, the changes from Bill 23 did have a downward impact, to municipalities' ability to collect revenues to fund growth-related expenditures. So just an overview of, what Bill 23 actually introduced. So what you're seeing on the slide now, the ones on top in green, these are currently in force, and really we do have to abide by it regardless of whether you've updated your bylaw or not. So, for example, the first one is inclusionary zoning units. So if you are within this type of area, which is really more so your, the 400 series hubs and those types of municipalities along those corridors that have inclusionary zoning, affordable housing units, would be exempt if they are required under those bylaws. Nonprofit housing. So if you did have any nonprofit housing, then they are automatically exempt from paying DCs. So if you did have, so historically under Bill 108, if you recall, I did say that there were installment payments for rentals and institutional. There was actually another one which was for nonprofit housing, and they were allowed to pay over 20 years or 21 installments. So if you did have any nonprofit housing in the municipality for developments, and they were paying that annual installment, then as of November 28, 2022, they would no longer pay those installments. So they would still pay up until that date, and then moving forward, regardless of whether you updated your bylaw or not, they do not pay anymore. And then the additional residential unit exemptions. Well, this wasn't really an addition to the act. They did revise the exemption where they extended on the qualifiers of a second and third unit. Where they removed, let's say, the size requirement of the home. So historically, you were able to add 2 additional apartments, let's say, to a single, as long as you don't more than double the size of the home. Now it just says you can add, 2 additional units, period. So again, we are tracking this and working with staff to see what the impacts would be, let's say, in terms of capacity for water or any other service. But as of right now, again, this is still included within your bylaw. It's just been elaborated upon. The next 2 are currently not in force yet, but again, I'll provide some additional details in the next slide. But essentially, there's the affordable rental unit, affordable owned units, and attainable units. So under Bill 23, which again was subsequently amended by Bill 134, affordable units, whether it's rental or owned, essentially the simple definition that was released under that bill was that it's considered affordable as long as it's no more than 80% of the market value or, average purchase price, within the area. Or sorry, just period, the average purchase price of the home or the average market rent. So it was a little bit more on that higher level. We weren't sure, is this by area, is this by municipality, is this by region? We weren't sure what 80% meant at the end of the day. Attainable, it's yet to be defined by the legislation. However, the initial release of the definition simply just said that it's not considered affordable, and it needs to be sold at arm's length from the seller. Again, no further definition. So until that's released, again, it's still not in effect. Bill 134, which came into effect on December 4th of last year, then said, okay, well, for an affordable rental or affordable owned, we're going to add income qualifiers to this. So what it reads now is if it's considered affordable rental, if the rent is less than 30% of the 60th percentile of income for rental households or average market rent set by the bulletin. And alternatively, for the affordable owned, same idea, 30% of the 60th percentile of the household income would be considered affordable. So we're not sure exactly, again, how they're going to situate this, whether it'll be, by municipality, your average in West Lincoln, an average, let's say, in Pelham or Thorold. Will they do it by region? So, see average within the region. We're not sure yet. Again, until it's defined by the bulletin. And then furthermore, because if that is the case, then, an average in one area could be very different somewhere else. So you could have situations where, if the home prices are, being, increased, at least the average because of another area within, the municipality having all that, high valued, purchase prices, then there could be a situation where certain areas within the municipality, because of, the income as well as the price of the home, that could actually be considered all affordable, simply just because of the laws of averaging and, trying to apply everything to a larger area. So as of right now, these are not currently in effect. However, we are waiting to see what the bulletin will, provide us, and essentially, how these policies are meant to be interpreted through your bylaws and how they would be applied from a development charge standpoint. Now, in terms of the other changes, again, I'll kind of go through this briefly, but there's further reductions to the development charges that you can collect for. There's now DC discounts that you must provide. So if you're a rental housing development, and the way that they define rental housing is the whole building has to be for rent, so every single unit within the building, and you need a minimum of 4 units in order for it to be considered rental. So with that being said, if you are a one-bedroom rental unit, then you get a 15% discount on whatever the calculated DCs are. If you're a 2-bedroom, you get a 20%, and then if you're 3 bedrooms or more, you get 25%. So that's, that needs to be applied right off the cuff when calculating the development charges. Now, there's also additional revenue reductions. I think I mentioned this earlier. The removal of housing as an eligible DC service, again, doesn't impact the township, but the region had this DC, so that the way they can provide housing within Niagara, that's now been removed. So they can no longer use development charges to assist in paying for those housing initiatives. Capital cost amendments, I talked about this with the studies and the land. The historical levels of service, again, we kind of went through that through the question and answers, 10 to 15 years. And then lastly, on the revenue reduction, we now have the mandatory phase-in of development charges. So again, as of right now, for Bill 23, not looking at Bill 185, if you were to pass a bylaw, starting in day 1 of that bylaw being in effect, you can only collect a maximum of 80% of the calculated charges. So let's assume that, your bylaw was, $50,000, let's say, then at the end of the day, you can only collect 40. So immediately you're losing, $10,000 that you now need to, recover from other means. So, but that charge then that then increases over time. So year 1, it's at 80%, then it goes to 85, 90, 95 every single year, until you get to year 5 at 100%. Now, your bylaw does have a clause where you're allowed to index the charge. So every year, even though you're going to, let's say, 85% in year 2, you're actually collecting a little bit more because then you can index it based on inflation from StatsCan. So we do have your NRB CPI, which is the non-residential building construction price index. A little bit of a mouthful, but that is the index that we need to utilize in order to inflate or index your charges in your bylaw. So again, you can add inflation on top of these 5% increases. And then with respect to the administration, again, this is more when administering the bylaw, but if you do have any of those rate freezes or those installment payments, if you recall, I did say earlier that you can add interest to them. So historically, you could really designate whatever interest rate the municipality deems appropriate through an interest rate policy, because there was no prescribed rate. But now Bill 23 did set a maximum interest rate, so you can only collect a maximum or impose a maximum interest rate, which is the average prime of the large banks plus 1 percentage point. So, for example, right now in the last quarter, let's say it was 7.6%, on the interest rates, then what you can impose is 8.6%. So again, just 1 percentage point higher than whatever the average prime is. Again, that's an example. I believe it was around 7, but we'll have to double check. There is a requirement by the finance team through their, reporting to now allocate 60% of the monies in the reserve funds for water, wastewater, and services related to the highway. Again, the word is allocate, so it doesn't mean spend. So you don't have to actually spend the money, you just have to ensure that, if you collected, let's say, $1 million in roads reserve funds, then 600,000 of that, million, so 60%, would then need to be allocated to certain projects. So whether it's a project that'll be undertaken this year, next year, 10 years from now, you're earmarking that money for those particular projects. And then the DC bylaw is allowed to be, has a useful life now of 10 years rather than 5. Now, there are some municipalities, again, that, potentially we would assume that you would at least do some type of review in the interim, even though you want to keep your bylaw up to 10 years. Because what we're noticing, especially even just through the past few years, is tender prices, construction values, purchase prices, et cetera, they've all gone beyond inflation. So if you are having to pay for construction or purchase, goods and equipment, and your DC is only being indexed by inflation, but obviously your costs are higher than inflation, then you're already recovering less than what your expenditures are. So that should be really an examination on a periodic basis, how you're tracking with inflation. So with that being said, so that's kind of the Bill 23, overview. I would like to provide you with just a brief summary of what the potential proposed changes are that are coming out of Bill 185. So it was released earlier this month on April 10th, and it's called the Cutting Red Tape to Build More Homes Act. So it proposes a number of changes, I believe to almost 15 different acts, legislation, but really in terms of the development charges in the Planning Act, these are the main ones that would really affect you in terms of the DC study. So again, we are monitoring this, and we will keep not only the staff, but all of our municipal clients and anyone else within Ontario apprised of this information as it becomes known to us as well. But as of right now, the main items that they are proposing is that the definition of eligible capital costs be amended to include studies again. So if you recall in Bill 23, they removed studies. Now we add it back in, which would really be helpful, especially if you're trying to pay for, let's say, transportation master plans, water master plans, where if that's really the study to identify what services you need for growth, then the DC should pay for those studies that are informing the growth-related needs. The next one then is a removal of the mandatory phase-in of charges. So while we did have that before as part of Bill 23, the proposed changes here are to remove it. Now, we don't know whether there's a retroactive, once a building permit is pulled, I'm not sure if there's going to be a mechanism of, going back and trying to get those monies that have already been collected. But at this point in time, again, if this bill, were to proceed, it would probably be with a transition phase as to, the date that it would be effective. There is the process for minor amendments that they're proposing to the development charge bylaws. So, there would be at least as it's proposed right now, municipalities would be allowed to make a minor amendment to their bylaws that have been passed to basically amend it to include studies as well as change dates, remove the mandatory phase-in clause if you do have it within your bylaw, without having to go through all of the background study process. So as it reads right now, you wouldn't have to go through all the implementation, redoing, the whole background study or doing the, the public meetings or appeal period. So that's how it reads as of now, but again, this is something that is still going through standing committee, and we'll keep everyone apprised as to whatever changes may come out of that. And then another thing that came out too is a reduction of the time of the DC rate freeze related to site plan and zoning bylaw amendments. So if you recall, I had mentioned, once you have your rates frozen, it's a period of 2 years that you have to freeze the bylaw. Now they're proposing that they decrease this to 18 months. So just a year and a half, and then you must pull a building permit within that time. If you don't pull a building permit, then whatever the prevailing rates are as of that date would be what you're paying at the end of the day. They are also proposing to modernize the public notice requirements. So right now, if you read the Development Charge Act and the associated regulations, you must provide all your notices through a newspaper, which is, in the clerk's opinion, a sufficient general circulation. A lot of municipalities don't have a local newspaper anymore. So this is something where they are modernizing it now to allow, other forms of, distribution for notices. And then one of the things too that came as not part of the bill, but really part of the release of the bill was the implementation of the affordable residential unit exemptions. So as of right now, they are anticipating that it would probably be in effect by June 1st. But again, until we see the, what is released, this is all proposed. So with that being said, I'll just quickly go through the overview of the current charges and policies, and then I think I'll stop for questions. So as of right now, within the municipality, you can see here, these are your current development charge rates. When you're looking at the municipal-wide services, so these are really for DCs in areas where they do not have water or wastewater servicing, or really your rural areas. For a single detached home, you're paying about just over $14,000. The largest of which coming from road services related to highway as well as parks and recreation. And then as you go down the list, you get the multiples at $9,400, just under $9,000 for the large apartments, the 2+ bedrooms. The 1-bedroom apartments and lower, it's just about $5,500. And then you also have a charge for non-residential for wind turbines, and then the cost per square foot. And with the wind turbines, it really is only looking at the roads component, fire protection, and then studies. So for sure, a wind turbine does not utilize Parks and Recreation or library, hence, how that was determined at the time. And then in addition to that, we also have urban services. So really this is your water, wastewater, and storm. So more again in the areas that would receive this type of servicing. So layering on that extra $1,900 or $750 for the small apartments, you're looking at an overall charge, of about $16,000 for single detached, $10,700 really for townhouses, your multiples, and then $10,200 for the apartments, and again, just over $6,300 for the 1-bedroom apartments. And then you can see there with the corresponding non-residential charges. Now, at the end of the day, while those are your charges, it's not full cost recovery in terms of what you can actually get from DCs relative to your capital program. There are a number of exemptions you must adhere to. So the notable ones, again, that are coming out of the act that you must, you must provide. So you do have the upper and lower tier government and school boards. So for example, if the region builds a facility, you can't charge them a DC. Likewise, if you build one, you don't pay a regional DC. School boards, they're under the province, so a higher pecking order, they don't pay a municipal DC. Industrial buildings, they are allowed to expand up to 50% of the, enlarge up to 50% of the footprint. So the enlargement of the existing building without having to pay a development charge. Now, we do draw the line in the sand in your bylaw where, it would be really a one-time 50% expansion, right? So once you get that credit, you don't get it anymore. You don't want someone coming in with a 100,000 square foot facility, going up to 150, the next year coming back, I want to expand again to 225, so on and so forth, and never pay a DC. So we do provide a one-time expansion, and if they've already, received it, then it's a one and done. The development of lands, I already mentioned this, so if it receives operating funds and it's in university lands, it would be exempt. And then I mentioned all the other ones as well that are on this list, as I mentioned earlier. So, in terms of a discretionary exemption, municipalities are allowed, through council and through recommendations from staff, are allowed to add any additional exemptions that you may see fit to your bylaw. So, some of it you may reduce the charge, whether it's, in whole or in part, and for certain categories or types as well. So for example, if you don't want to charge places of worship, then you could add that as an exemption. Or maybe perhaps you want to provide a discount for industrial, so maybe instead of charging them the full amount, you want to only do 50%. You're allowed to do that, or even up to 0. So you have the ability as council to reduce in part or in whole the DCs, and even by service if you'd like. You may phase in the charge over time, so if it's going up, let's say from nothing, like a fresh municipality that never had DCs, to something, then maybe, you want to allow developers, to at least acclimate themselves to the new environment. So maybe you phase in over time, so you implement 50% now, and then the full 50 is then in year 2. Or again, however way you want to slice and dice that phase in. And then finally, redevelopment credits. This is not part of the Development Charge Act, but it is specific under case law, where if you had, let's say, a facility or a building that burnt down or got demolished, you should be allowed a period of time to rebuild that facility without having to pay a DC. And so an example would be, again, if a house, knock on wood, if it burned down or there's a demolition that occurred, they should be allowed a period. Again, most municipalities typically use about 5 years to rebuild that, that home. Again, not pay a DC. Likewise, if you're also changing the use, so let's say you want to knock down one single-family home, maybe you want to add 4 townhomes, then you get a credit on the home that was already there, up to a certain time frame. Right? You don't want someone coming in with a picture from 1900s to say there was a home in this property, which never utilized any of the more modern services, and then getting a credit. So we do put a time limit to that, which again can be determined by staff and council. So with respect to my example, if you want to, let's say, build, 4 townhomes, and let's say each townhome was about, $30,000 on a DC, then 4 times 30,000, there's 120 grand. But in my example of a $50,000, single detached dwelling, then I take that 120,000 minus the 50, which would have been there existing. So really the payable by that development would only be 70,000, taking into account the single family home that was already there. And it works the same way going from residential to non-res or vice versa. Now, in terms of the township's current discretionary exemptions, you can see here on the list that these are from your current bylaw. And as of right now, we have maintained them in your, through discussions with staff. We will maintain these as part of your draft bylaw. You do have the ability, prior to the council consideration of the bylaw in July, to make any amendments to this you may choose. But as of right now, we still do have the cemeteries and burial grounds, places of worship, granny flats, agricultural uses. You already do have the affordable housing projects, in municipal housing facilities with agreements through Niagara region. Again, so maybe perhaps this is now overlapping with that affordable housing initiative. So maybe, we're already providing the affordable at the time. And then finally, the canopies. So these are more, again, those overhang structures, so including gas station canopies, or those intended for parking and loading and unloading of vehicles. So if it meets that criteria, they don't pay a DC. In terms of the local service policies, so this is something I'd just like to express that while we do have a development charge that really outlines what you'd like to recover from the development community in order to pay for your infrastructure, which again benefits the broader area, we do include a appendix within our background study that itemizes what's called a local service policy, or what you require a developer to build on your behalf, within their subdivision, that really only benefits, again, the subdivision or all the residents or businesses within that area. So this is really coming out of Section 59.1 of the Act, where there's no additional levies, which essentially prohibits you from, imposing any additional costs not authorized within the Development Charge Act. So we want to be very clear if there are works to be constructed, would they fall under a DC or would they fall under a developer responsibility? So typically, again, as you probably have seen through the capital program, we include a lot of more of the broader, larger order roads. We include water mains or sewer mains, really that are, to service these developments, and that would be within the development charges. But what you would include as part of the local service policy is identifying what you require them to construct, which you would then assume over time. So these are more your localized roads, intersection improvements, traffic signals, right? If there's an intersection improvement that's just outside their development and that's required, so that way everyone can turn into their development, then really that could be a local service because it's really directly benefiting that particular subdivision. Sidewalks, streetlights, bike paths, routes, lanes, trails, noise abatement measures, again, easements, water, wastewater, and storm. Typically, we have a threshold as to what would be included. So, if it's a certain size pipe or if it's really just internal to their subdivision, then truly that would be a local service that they would construct, as part of their development. And then park requirements. If they're providing you parks, you want to ensure that, you set the minimum requirements you require. So typically what we notice in some local service policies is that you want to ensure that you're not getting, land with garbage on it. So, you would ensure that, any dedicated land to you would not have the topsoil stripped off or not have garbage on it. You want it seeded, sodded, fenced. So we establish at least a base level as to what you typically already do as part of your agreements. But we just want to document it within the local service policy. So we are working with staff to develop this, and we do have a draft one, complete. Again, we are just making some, some final touches, but again, that would be part of the background study. So this schematic, again, I'll leave this for, your review at a later date. But essentially, at a high level, these are the types of, this is how we would, for the most part, draw the line in the sand as to what would be a DC versus what would be a local service policy. Again, this is just an example. So, what we would include in the DC, maybe for water, water treatment, storage facilities, that's not required as part of an individual development. But then, perhaps any underground service that's internal to the development, or, booster stations, pumping stations that, again, are very localized, that's only required by that particular subdivision, would be a local service. And similarly with roads, again, external roads, maybe that's all DCable, but then any of the roads internal to a subdivision, really should be their costs. And what's not shown on here, we also have stormwater and parks as well that we include. Just some last matters in terms of the DC bylaw and the study. The Act does not allow for cross-subsidization. So what I mean by that is, if you decide by any means to reduce, let's say, non-residential, so let's assume we had $1 million, I'll use a simple example. We had $1 million infrastructure of capital, of which 900,000 was res, 100,000 was non-res. If you decide to exempt or at least reduce the cost for the non-res side, so what you're only recovering from the non-res is only 50,000 of that 100, notwithstanding any of the exemptions that you must adhere to, then you cannot make up that 50,000 by putting it on residential and making the residential 950. So you cannot cross-subsidize in that sense. So if you reduce that non-res by 50,000, you must now come up with that 50 in order to pay for the rest of that, that total $1 million infrastructure. The background study, when we do release it, again, it will have all the appendices and all the information that we talked about today, as well as through the process working with staff. It will be released again on May 13th, and it will be available to the public a minimum of 60 days. So before you can even pass the bylaw. So again, in addition to us meeting with them back on mid-April, they also have, essentially that full time period to review the background study. And then with respect to the public meeting, so within that process, the implementation process, when we release the background study, we have to wait a minimum of 60 days in order to pass the bylaw or consider a bylaw. And between the bylaw and the release of the study, we need to have a mandatory public meeting. And the mandatory public meeting must be a minimum of 2 weeks after the release of the study. So you can't just you can't just release the study and then have a mandatory public meeting the next day. So there needs to be at least a minimum of 2 weeks for a review, and then have, the public come in and provide any comments or questions to council as part of that process. And then I mentioned earlier, indexing. You're allowed to index your charge every year. So again, in terms of your bylaw, typically it's done at the beginning of the year. If you want to change it to the anniversary date, you can do that. But essentially, once a year, you update based on indexing from StatsCan. And then lastly, in terms of the timing of payment, I already mentioned this earlier. DCs are typically paid at the time of building permit issuance. Again, you can go into agreements to enter into early or late payments, depending on the scenario. As I mentioned, you have the installment payments for those rental and institutional housing, which are all subject to the interest rate, average prime plus 1%. And then the rate freeze, as of right now, it's 2 years. But when Bill 185 is passed and everything is status quo based on how it reads as of today, then that will be reduced to 18 months. Which again, you are subject, it is subject or allowable to apply interest cost to them. Before we get now into the actual growth forecast capital, which I'm sure everyone is excited to see, are there any questions at least on that, current information?
Okay, so let's go to the people who are online first. So Councillor Rayner, Trombetta, or Riley. Do any one of you have a particular question based on the section that we've just done?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I just have one question. So agricultural buildings like barns, poultry barns, pig barns, chicken barns, cattle barns, they're exempt from DCs, is that correct?
Through the mayor, that is correct. Based on your current discretionary exemption, those type of buildings would be exempt.
Okay, appreciate that, thank you.
Either of the other councillors, Councillor Trombetta, do you have a question?
No.
Okay, and Councillor Riley? Good, okay, now we'll go to members that are sitting in council. So, Councillor Bradford, anything? Councillor Chichok, your turn.
Actually, I don't know whether or not we have to actually bother Byron, or whether or not my question can be answered by our own Director of Finance, either the acting one or the other one. On page 25 of the presentation, it talked about places of worship, and I understand that in the past, we've only exempted the sanctuary of a church, because some churches nowadays become a community church and have buildings that include daycares and schools and a lot of other functionality. It may not happen right now, but it may be something that happens in the future. So is our past practice to exempt the entirety of the religious building or just the sanctuary?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Gannon, the sanctuary.
Thank you. I'm sure Councilor Mann appreciates that.
Listen, we have so many titles and names going back and forth.
I
It's
agree.
all good.
I only pointed it out because,
I'm good with that, no.
and the other thing is that while mine is along the line of Councillor Rayner's question, but perhaps it's our past practice that I'm looking for, and that is agricultural uses are also including greenhouses as well as barns. It's my understanding. And but have we exempted farm help houses? I know that there's a real dilemma in the farming industry right now, that farm help, whether it's temporary foreign workers or if you've got a large cattle barn and you've got a farm manager, oftentimes they don't have a place to live, and people are looking for that. And I know there's two problems with it. One, it's expensive, no matter where you are. But secondly, a lot of these farm employees are having to move into a town where they're using rental facilities that could be used for others if they were able to have a building on the farm property. So is it our past practice, or is this exemption of agricultural uses inclusive of a farm help house?
Through you, Mayor Gannon, to Councillor Chichok. My experience, I don't think we've had an application for a farm help house that I'm aware of. Perhaps the Director of Planning would know, as the building department falls under his responsibility, or perhaps Byron would know if agriculture includes farm help houses, but as far as I know, we've never had an application that I can remember.
So either of you, either Director or Byron, an answer from either of you, sir?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can advise that there have been no farm help houses that have gone through in the last 18 or so years since I've been here. There have been a couple of rebuilds or replacements, but no new buildings of that nature of a recent style that I'm aware of.
Okay. So, thank
Madam
you.
Mayor.
So can we ask Byron in his experience if he's ever dealt with that?
I'm sure he has.
Perhaps.
Through the mayor, so some municipalities, they would specify exactly what would be part of that agricultural use or farm use. So if this is something that you'd like to explore, where you'd like to, be very specific with the discretionary exemption, so right now it just says place of worship or agricultural, but if you want to be very distinct and say place of worship, at least the worship portion, that way anything that's commercial, like the daycare, Montessori schools that are applied, that would not be considered as part of the actual place of work, the bona fide place of worship. And then in terms of agricultural uses, we would just have to double check the definition within your draft bylaw to see what it includes, if it includes the farm building as well as the farm help house. Because if there is something that you'd like to separate, then this is the opportunity to do so within your definitions, as well as how the discretionary exemption is specified instead of a one word, to actually have a sentence to qualify what you're trying to exempt.
Thank you for that advice. Councillor Chichok, back to you.
Thank you. I would like to do further research, or at least have staff think about the place of worship being the sanctuary only, because that is a problem that I think is becoming. A church is a church community. I'm not in any way suggesting we don't want to have those kinds of facilities, but we do have people that run daycares, and they are competing because they go into a building that has to pay DCs. We have people who have seniors maybe offering programs or physiotherapy or something like that. We need to look at the meaning of the term so that we are not disadvantaging like organizations. And that is something that has come to my attention with my liaison and the chamber. So I'm bringing it back to ask the question. As to the farm help houses, I know we haven't built any because it's expensive, and there's a minimum on what you can do depending on what legislation's in place at the time. But we could drive to several places that are housing people who work on the farms, because no one's ever built a new one. But that's the issue. And especially if you have more than one person, you can't put them in one house. And if you have temporary foreign workers, the legislation just explodes. So I say that if we are looking, not forced, but if we are in a position at some point in the near future where people do want to have farm help, and the family farm is losing generations that don't want to live there because they can't live there, don't want to work the farm, without that. So, Madam Mayor, I'm just saying we should be at least examining discretionary options for the future, because this is supposed to last a very long time.
Thank you. Anything further? Anything?
I assume
Okay.
before the treasurer, before the CAO speaks, that you're right, these names are going to get me to an early grave. But I would assume that when I say explore, I don't mean that I'm not looking to do it without, I want just to have an exploration to see if we should be considering these things.
So my one thought about that would be the fact that although it's expanded now to 10 years, there is a possibility to reopen more easily. So that might be the answer at this point in time, since we've had no applications, but may perhaps. So anyway, anything different than that from anybody before we let Byron move on to the last? Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Ganan. As this is training, I'm going to take an opportunity to ask some questions. The redevelopment credits, we have 5 years in our current bylaw. Are you seeing any municipalities lowering that to less than 5 years?
Through the mayor, I've seen a range of them. I'm not necessarily a lowering, but from other bylaws I've examined, again, throughout Ontario, I've seen it as low as 36 months, 3 years, and as high as almost 10 years. So it does differ from bylaw to bylaw. It's just now, what would you like to include as part of a Made in West Lincoln type of exemption?
Thank you. And I have another question. I know the affordable rental units, we don't have a lot of information on that as of today, but do you envision that a permit could be issued as a rental, and then in 5 years, it could be converted to a condo? And they're using the legislation to not pay development charges and then convert later on?
Through the mayor, that's a great question. As of right now, again, the act is it's more on a general scale, so it's silent in terms of, that type of scenario. So the only scenario right now where we can include an agreement, which would last a period of 25 years, is on the affordable side. So if a unit is deemed affordable and gets the exemption, then you must enter into an agreement over a 25-year period to ensure that unit remains affordable. And if it does change hands and it's sold, and if it's sold at a profit rather than affordable, then there will be a mechanism for you to collect the DCs that should be payable. Now again, we don't have the regulations yet, so we're not sure who gets charged. Is it the new owner, the previous owner, the first owner that built the place? And what DCs would be payable? Would it be the DCs that were at the time when it should have been paid, or the DCs incorporated now? So we have that, while we have at least a preliminary, outlook on the affordable side without any other further details, we don't have that same type of guidance on the rental housing side. So there are some municipalities that are undertaking updates now, and they are trying to work with their solicitors to try to figure out a framework to put into their within their DC bylaw as to what would occur if there was a change of ownership, or if it does go from rental to, an owned unit. So I don't have the example off the top of my head, but I know there are a couple that are exploring that option. So it is something where, we'll have to, navigate those waters when it comes, but as of right now, there's no guidance under the Development Charge Act.
Anything further, John? Okay, one last hit. Anybody else with a question that they just thought of while they've been listening to this discussion? All right, seeing no hands, I guess it's back to you.
All right. We're in the home stretch. So the next piece here just really talks about now the specifics of the study. So we talked about the growth forecast, the draft capital program, and the draft rates. In terms of the growth forecast, again, this is work that was undertaken, with the township, along with looking at a number of information, looking at, your current applications, looking at the potential developments that will occur as a result of the Smithville Master Plan. And really just, again, discussions with staff too on, how they believe it'll proceed moving forward. Again, relative to known information as of now. So you can see here, this draft growth forecast schematic provides you at least a historical, building permit activity relative to what potentially may come over the next, call it 25, 26 years. So historically, dating back to 2014, you can see there the black is your actual building permits that you've issued. At its highest point in 2015, you issued 128. So really on average, you're probably looking at around, call it 70 building permits per year. On average, that's the red line. Moving forward, as of 2024, again, looking at the applications potentially right now in the pipeline relative to, what's actually been presented to the building department. We are estimating, again, through the work with staff and our land planning team, land economics and planning team at the firm, we're estimating roughly about 47 building permits this year for 2024. Having said that, through the work with the, Smithville Master Plan and the servicing that would need to be, constructed in order to allow for those developments to proceed, you do see a ramp up over the next couple of years. So the first year in 2025 then goes up to 200, and then subsequent to that, then we're looking at, roughly 320 per year, going up to 330, and then an average of 345 homes. Again, this is all based on being able to provide the servicing within the Smithville area, and then having all the developers proceed, based on their site plan applications and other applications within the development pipeline. Just to provide you with a bit of a summary here, the dark blue at the bottom of the bar charts, that's the low density, so that's your singles and semi-detached. The medium density, so this is your townhouses, back-to-back townhomes, et cetera. That is middle portion, that's the lighter blue. And then the high density, which is truly your apartments, so that's the gold or that orangey yellow in the very top. So with that being said, we do look at two different growth forecast periods. We look at a 10-year and a long-term. The long-term being to 2051, which is the time horizon as identified within the master plan. So you can see just starting at the top part, which is really a summary of the population and employment. We're looking at, from a 10-year planning horizon, we're looking to increase by roughly 7,100 people over that 10-year period to 2034. That equates to roughly 2,840 homes. And in terms of employment, I know there's two sets of numbers there. The first one is the 1950. That's employment that includes work at home and no fixed place of work. So as you know, in today's environment, we have a lot of remote work. So a lot of people work from their homes. However, for the purposes of the DC, we look at the numbers excluding work at home and no fixed place of work, because the DCs are grounded on building permits and building of facilities. So work at home and no fixed place of work do not generate buildings. And if they did generate a building, let's say on the work at home, it's already probably captured as part of the residential piece. So with that being said, when we look at the employment, as I mentioned, it's excluding. So that's that 1,170. These are potentially the employment that would lead to the square footage of just over 1 million square feet, which would then pull a building permit and actually, construct a facility. Going to the right side on the long term, so again to 2051, we're looking to basically triple that number, so from 7,000 to 21,760 people over that time frame. That translates to just under 8,700 homes. And again, looking at the employment, again focusing on the excluding the work at home, no fixed place of work, that's about 3,400 employees. And that translates to an estimated increase of about 2.9 million square feet of non-residential. Going to the bottom left-hand side, this then extends on that residential piece. So you can see there, for the first period, the 10-year, 2024 to 34, that 2840, we can then see that 1,670 units are estimated to be singles and semis. 730 would be on the multiples, again, those townhomes style developments, and then 440 units of apartments. And then on the 2051, you can see again that extends now to almost 5,000 singles, just over 2,300 townhomes, and 1,340 apartments. And there's your total as it aligns to the top to the top chart. In terms of the square footage with respect to the non-residential, again, breaking it down into the different categories. So you can see there are still some primary developments anticipated over the next 10 to 26 year period, 27 year period. So we're looking at roughly 102,000 square feet of primary developments. Again, whether this is barns, farmhouses, whatever the case may be, it's 102,000 square feet. And then we have industrial, commercial, population related. So really these are your, your retail stores, et cetera. And then institutional. So in total, you can see the breakout, again, on that longer term, 1.6 million, just under 700,000 square feet for retail commercial, and then 492,000 for institutional. And that's a total of that 2.9 million that you saw above. Now, in terms of the capital program, so we do have some assumptions and key drivers that are really informing the capital program as of now. So the main, the main driver for the capital program are really related to the capital identified through that Smithville integrated municipal class environmental assessment. So there was that MCEA and really a master plan that identified a number of works that would be required for transportation, your roads. It also identified, trails from the Parks and Recreation side. We also looked at water and wastewater. So that really is the main capital items that are included in the DC study. Now, there are also projects that were identified in the prior DC study that have yet to be constructed or are still underway, and they've been included as part of the DC as well, just to maintain them as an assumption from the previous study. And where possible, their costs have been updated. So whether through discussions with the staff and reviewing the budgets, we may have updated tender prices or updated estimates through your capital plan. Or for some of them that, we simply just don't have the information right now because it may be in the latter half of your 10-year forecast, then we've at least inflated it by that NRB CPI that I had mentioned, roughly 43%. We're looking at a 5-year change. So at least at minimum, we had some type of inflationary factors to it. So with that being said, the punchline here is that based on all of the capital, that we've examined with the finance staff and as well as the other departments, we're roughly looking at just under $287 million worth of capital that would be required, for growth. So that's our gross costs. And again, as you can see here, the largest component is the roads and related infrastructure. So there's a lot of roads, sidewalks, intersection improvements, et cetera, all of which is encompassed in that $183 million. Again, these numbers for the most part are coming from that Smithville MCEA, and there's a portion here also that would be carryover from your prior DC study. Of that amount, if you recall earlier, there's a number of deductions we must do. So I'm going to skip post-period for now, but if I jump to the right-hand side where it says benefit to existing, if you recall, we go through each line to determine if a capital project has any benefit to the existing community. So that's identified here right now at $44.6 million. Again, we are going to be working, with the development community, perhaps to examine this, but as of right now, these are our draft findings. In terms of grants, subsidies, and other contributions, we have identified roughly $4.8 million. And this may come in the form of, some developments that may be providing the municipality with funds to assist with some of the construction of the works. Now, going back then to the post-period, these amounts are growth-related costs. However, they are identified for recovery in a future bylaw. So for example, with fire and parks and recreation, we don't have any master plans right now that inform capital going out to 2051. So in terms of, what we've identified as part of the analysis, we've only looked at a 10-year growth forecast for them, so only going out to 2034. So if there are any capital items identified here, there may be some potential for oversizing of a facility or having to purchase things, ahead of time in order to accommodate growth that would occur in years, 2035 to 2051. So these are still growth-related costs. We're just not including it for recovery for this bylaw. But once these growth forecasts or the master plans actually come to be, and these can now extend to 2051, then they would then be included as part of the recovery. So again, it's just because it's foregone from the calculations, doesn't mean it's not DC recoverable. It's just not reflective of the growth forecast for the 10-year period. So in total, once you net off that $5.5 million in post-period, you net off another $44.6 million for the benefit to existing, another $4.8 for the grant subsidies and other contributions. You're then left with $232 million worth of DC eligible items. Again, this is a lot of infrastructure really focused more so on the roads and then as well on the wastewater services. From there, we separated between residential and non-residential growth. So you can see there, of that amount, $203 million is res and about $28 million is non-residential. Now, if you recall, we take that number, divide it by the growth forecast. So you can see here, as of right now, if I just focus at least on the urban area, the municipal wide is there for your review. But from a single and semi-detached dwelling equivalent, that means that the charge is about $34,475 for each home, to be able to pay for all of the infrastructure that's identified in, those capital sheets that are presented in front of you. Going down the list, as you have less people in the homes, again, the charge is aligned to the persons per unit within each residential development. So within a townhome, that would generate about $23,600 for DC, $22,100 for the two-bedroom plus apartments. The one-bedroom and less is about $14,320. And then special care, special dwelling, we've added this new charge because this is more so for your, your Chartwell or those type of homes that really, it's not a non-residential, it's more residential in a non-private setting. So we typically look at it more on a per person or per bed basis within those homes. So that's reflecting that $11,970 charge. Extending on the non-residential, again, in maintaining the same type of attribution for the types of services for wind turbines, which only equated to services related to highway and fire. Again, studies are not included as part of this, again, because of Bill 23. Then that totals $21,000 for a wind turbine. And then in terms of the non-residential, that's about $10.93 all in per square foot. Now, the above rates are subject to the mandatory phase-in from Bill 23, as I mentioned. In terms of the rate comparison, so as of right now, again, looking at full services, you're about $16,000, just over $16,000. This amount takes you to $34,475. But again, the impetus for this really is that roads related, all the items coming out of the master plan. There's a lot of items there, a lot of upgrades, new roads, etc. Again, we have some fire protection, extending on your 2019 study. Given the level of growth, you will need additional fire protection in order to service that, hence the $2,200 charge that's reflected here. Parks and Recreation, for the most part, is in line with your current, charge. Again, it's slightly higher, but again, that also includes new trails that are identified through that MCEA. And then library services, again, somewhat in line with, what your current charge is if you were taking the cost and inflating it. And as I mentioned with growth studies, that's for now been zeroed out. In terms of the urban services, so stormwater, as we're developing your, local service policy, most of the developments will be required to have their own stormwater pond, stormwater drainage. So since that's going to be a local service policy, most of those costs have been removed from the DC. However, we still have a nominal amount because you do have a deficit in your reserve fund balance for prior works that you've worked on for implementing a stormwater infrastructure. So we're looking to recover that, which again is to the tune of about $22 per home. Wastewater is probably one of the largest increases. Again, that's coming out of the information from the master plan or the MCEA. And then with respect to water, while it does look like a drop, a lot of the works that were identified there were identified to be local service. So it did say we're all localized mains that would be constructed within the subdivisions, as most of the major trunks would either be constructed by the region where they would be connecting, or what you're responsible for are more, some type of external works that wouldn't be, again, to the form of full water main trunks that would be required for the internal servicing. Hence the drop from 1,300 to 267. So in total, this 34,475, if we were to do the mandatory phase-in year one, this actually drops to 27,580. So that's your 80% phase-in the first year. In terms of the non-res, we're going from $4 to $10.93. Again, similar types of services that are experiencing those increases. I'll leave this for your review. But in total, with the 80% phase-in, that $10.93 drops down to $8.74. I would also add that, your current study right now from 2019 only looked at a forecast really on a shorter term. I believe it went out a period of 10 years. So the fact that, right now we are going out to 2051 and we do have these master plans and the MCEA to inform us, that is really the driving factor of these rates. In terms of where you are currently, as you can see, the burgundy arrow is where you currently are in terms of the Niagara region comparators. The blue is where you would be if you were if it was calculated to the full extent, and the green would actually be where the DCs would be with the 80% phase-in. Now, to explain the bar chart here, the gold or the orangey yellow at the bottom, that's the region's charges. So everyone's paying the exact same amount, except for Waynfleet. They don't have water and wastewater servicing, hence they're paying the lesser of everybody. The blue is the lower tiers in each respective municipality. And then there's a slight sliver, I'm not sure if you could see it, but it is in green, and that's the education development charges. So the school boards do have a DC of their own. So in total, these three components make up a full development charge payable within the region of Niagara and the local municipalities. Now, I would note that for the ones that have this star at the bottom, those are municipalities that are either currently undertaking or will be undertaking a DC, based on simply the expiry of their bylaw, or if they're actually undertaking it right now, whether it's myself undertaking it or another firm, or they're doing it in-house. I just want to know, when we did prepare this presentation and sent it to staff, that Lincoln still says calculated with current, but they did pass their bylaw. So really right now, theirs isn't calculated, it's actually passed. But they are at that 80% right now, but you can see the very left-hand side is their calculated. And then anyone else that says calculated, that means that the study has been released, but it's still going through the implementation period for council. So, it's in the public realm, so hence we put it in here. But, it is subject to change if council decides to, pass something different, but these are the calculations based on the public development charges available. So in terms of the commercial, as you can see, again, you're on the right-hand side of this chart. With the updates, you'd be, again, left to the middle, and with the 80% phase-in, you're back right in the middle, with Lincoln, Welland, Pelham really being, to the left-hand side of you. And then lastly, with the industrial, again, you're kind of just in the middle between Port Colborne and Thorold. So this one right here will just take you just under Lincoln and Pelham. But again, with the 80% phase-in, you'd be essentially the same or just under the Thorold area-specific DC in Rolling Meadows. So with that being said, finally concludes my presentation. Thank you for your patience. Again, we did have the stakeholder meeting. We've now had the council workshop. So over the next couple of weeks, we will be working with the township to really finalize all the policies, the calculations. So what we presented is draft. There may be some further refinements once you see this during the public meeting, or even further refinements too when we get to the consideration of the bylaw. But again, as the timing stands, we are looking to release a study on May 13th, mandatory meeting on the 27th, and then the council consideration of the bylaw on July. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Can I just go to questions one more time since you
Yes.
did that last section? So we'll go into the in-chamber first. Anyone with questions about the last portion of that? Okay, Councilor Chichok, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. Page 32 is the draft growth forecast, and it shows on the right-hand side, multiples and apartments. If they are condos or apartments, so condo townhouses or condo bungalows or condo apartments, they would fall into both those categories, or how are they in this calculation?
Through the mayor, a great question. So from a development charge standpoint, at least in this case here, ownership doesn't matter. So if it's a townhouse, regardless whether it's condo or owned, it falls under a multiple. If it's an apartment, again, whether it's owned or rental, or it's still an apartment.
Thank you. And Madam Mayor, if I could, just with one comment. So people who moved here over the past number of years are going to be paying more for services we don't have that they want, because they will not be in development charges. Those who came here thinking they got a real deal on their house did. But as their house value increased, their property taxes are also going to have to, every time they come to one of their counselors, to say, we don't have one of those. Please build it. Because that's what I think this development charge is telling us. And if I'm wrong, certainly through you, Madam Chair, Madam Mayor, to Byron, new people coming here will be paying more, even though it's discounted and phased in. But they will be paying more, as far as DCs, for the things that they will want that we don't have, because it'll be in the DCs, which will increase the value of the price of the house. But if they looked at Pelham or Lincoln, they'd be paying even more. So we're maintaining our place, has been stated by our representative from Watson, but we're maintaining our place in the middle of the pack. But I'm not sure exactly if the goal of the government that we have in power today was to reduce the price of houses. And developers think that development charges are a flow-through. They put them in, and that goes on top of the price. To build a house in Mississauga or to build a house in West Lincoln should cost about the same for materials. Our development charges are substantially less, and yet I see the price of houses to be substantially the same. So I'm not sure exactly where someone wants to place the guilt, but I sure don't want to see it coming against West Lincoln. I guess that's the point I'm making. Our DCs are what they are. They've been calculated by a third party. The price of our land has been held by a lot of developers, but those aren't the components that are driving those house prices up. And the cost of building the house in both Mississauga and here are the same. So there are a lot of municipalities that are being chastised, Madam Mayor. You know, you're not building them fast enough, and that's a factor of the developers not being able to get their ducks in order, and they're being told that the price of the houses that we have are still too high. I'm not exactly sure what more we would be in control of. And I'm just saying this because I'm frustrated. This is absolute sense. This has been done. We can poke holes in it all we want, but we're not going to take much out or in or over. And yet, and our DCs are substantially less. So if the market is making the price of the house go up, that should not be put onto the burden of the municipality. And I don't want to go to any more of those AMO and Roma meetings and be told that we really have to squeeze the lemon a little bit further to make the price of houses go down. So that's what all I got to say.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. No. Okay, to the fellows online, so Councillor Rayner, any further comments or questions?
I just have a question. Back on the charts of buildings, permits, you had, I believe the chart showed 47 in 2024, and then it takes a little bit of a leap in 2025, and then it goes ridiculously stupid after that. Is that not correct? Oh yeah, there it is.
It's up for you.
Okay, so 47 and 24. That's projected amount of builds, but if the town wishes to retain its culture and its identity as a small, quaint agricultural community, is there anything can be done to reduce that considerably so that we don't destroy the heritage of our area in which we live?
Who would you like to address that question to? Director of Planning, perhaps?
No, to the gentleman. Well, I guess the Director of Planning, maybe. I mean, we were told this is the numbers, but I mean, we can also tell them what we think of the numbers, can't we? I mean, we can also control how many people come into our township. They just can't ram it down our throat. I believe democracy is still part of the footholds of this country. If we don't want this ridiculous high number, which would totally destroy the the rural aspect and country living of a small, nice, quaint town not far from the rat race. I don't want to make it into another rat race.
Okay,
Is there a way that we can tone this down to what would be acceptable for most of the people who are now coming to this community and respect what we have now, and that's why they're coming here. Otherwise, what's the sense of coming here if it's going to look like where they came from 10 years from now?
Okay. Director of Planning, Mr. Trevor, would you like to address that, please?
I'm not sure it's a simple answer, but the bottom line, I guess, is the fact that the allocation was given to us by the region, and we've been working through the master comprehensive plan, community plan, whatever term you want to assign to it, since 2019 to come up with a way to try and implement these numbers. And through the policy work that we've implemented in OPA 63 and in fact in 62, we're doing our best to keep the character of Smithville as part of that plan, and we are doing our best to protect agriculture while doing so. So there's no question that the only way to accommodate this is going to be to see higher densities. But believe me, as I sit here, I'm hoping that when we discuss applications in the future around the council table, that we don't look back and think, oh shoot, we just got another Bimbrook. So we're trying to do it in a way that accommodates what it makes the most sense for Smithville. And any of the applications as they come forward, we'll have to have that kind of discussion and have that kind of lens on our review and approval process.
So just to clarify for Councillor Rayner, but we are not beyond our urban boundary expansion that we have now. We are not looking that we're going to have to expand further to achieve these numbers. Is that correct, Director?
That's correct. The numbers as allocated are how we assigned the urban boundary that we have. I think for the affordability piece, we're probably going to see higher densities than were contemplated then. So I would anticipate that our boundary will get us well past 2051, which is the current target. And I think we can probably do so without having to expand further.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think members of council and staff understand where I'm coming from, that to me, heritage is a big part of my past. The history is very important, and the fact that it can be maintained and appreciated for generations to come can only exist when you don't destroy the present and think that the future is the way to go. Because that's what everybody else is doing, and somebody down the road is going to say, oh darn, I wish I didn't do that. And I'm hoping we're one of them, because we're kind of special here. We have the largest rural agricultural area of all the 12 municipalities in the region of Niagara. We have something that people appreciate. I have people come here at the Eclipse and parked on the side of the road on my field to watch it. I've had them come in the summertime and sit on a lawn chair saying, I'm from Grimsby, but man, it's so beautiful out here. I want that to continue for generations to come, and we can't do this if we bring thousands and thousands and thousands of people in here and think that we're still going to retain our agricultural heritage when we've got people tripping over each other. There's so many. So I just hope we just keep that in mind in the future. I appreciate what Brian's saying. I understand we have our urban boundaries set, but if we just cram these people into this in order to fulfill the objectives, it's still going to make a nightmare for traffic. It's going to make a nightmare for other things, fire services and everything else. There's a whole bunch of ramifications for bringing a lot more people into the municipality, including fire, ambulance, sewer, water. I mean, these are all factors that are just going to skyrocket everything, and the rest of the taxpayers who the generation in this township are going to pay for it, and I don't think that's fair.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, Councillor Trombetta, either of you have a comment or a question?
I'll jump in for a quick one.
Okay, go ahead.
I guess just to poke on what Councillor Rayner is talking about, I think it's fair to remind them that, we had some of the lowest assessment growth, as we saw our last budget. So as much as I understand his concerns, and then perhaps maybe he's more worried about what's happening in the agricultural community, in the rural communities, we're going to see abnormally high property tax rates go if we don't address some of the growth issues. And so again, I hear what he's saying, but I think you have to be trying to process here, mindful of how we grow the community, not necessarily to the point that it's a cattle barn, and we're trying to get everything we can inside of it, but how we do it responsibly, and addressing the intensification need, if that's one approach, achieving those targets. Cost of living doesn't get cheaper. It only goes up, so the cost of running the organization and the municipalities will only increase over time. So again, if the idea is that we're going to take an anti-stance on growth and we're not going to grow, well, you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve. You're going to see a lot higher taxes with a lot less in return. We need to just grow it responsibly. So I hear what he's saying. I understand his concern, but I think it's an important message to not mislead anyone thinking that the best solution is to do nothing. That is going to actually just cost my children, my grandchildren, possibly my great-grandchildren a lot more for that kind of irresponsible approach, if that is the message we're trying to send the community.
Thank you. Okay, so Councillor Trombetta, anything from you? We're looking for questions, actually, of Mr. Tan, who's sitting here sort of listening to this dialogue going back and forth. But do you have a question based on the DC, sir?
No,
Did you want to make a comment?
I'm good. Everything was said by my colleagues. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think I will just thank you for a very thorough presentation. I know that it's a lot to go through. I think that moving forward, you're going to be going through it again. Do you actually do, just for my own knowledge, the presentation as well when we have when it gets to the May 27th? Is that another thing on you?
Through yourself, Mayor, yes, I do. I will come in and provide the public meeting presentation as well.
Okay. You are going to so know West Lincoln very well by the time you get through this process. But thank you very much for coming tonight and helping us all understand what this is all about. We do appreciate it.
Anytime.
So we do have a resolution to come out of that. We need a mover and a seconder, just that the presentation be received. So Councillor Bradrick, could I ask you to make that motion, please? And since Councillor Chichok, you're here, and would you also second that, please? And as soon
Councillor
as-
Bradrick
as soon
reads
as
it all,
Councillor
seconded.
Bradrick finds it,
Oh,
then
I'm
we'll,
finding
we'll
it
go
right
with
now.
that.
So you're asking me to move that the presentation from Byron Tan, Watson and Associates Economics Limited respecting the 2024 Developmental Charges Council workshop be received.
And now, Councillor, you're fine to second that?
I'll second that, certainly.
Okay, and so, do we have a vote coming up? Okay, all right. Oh, so Councillor Chichok on a different computer. We'll have to watch with a gentleman. I'm on, but mine hasn't come up either, so. Nope, didn't come. Yep. Okay, so let's use the show of hands, since we're having some technical issues again with people plugged in different ways. So, show of hands, please, to just receive the report. That's good. That passes. Thank you. Sometimes that one's more simple. So we next have on our agenda just a staff report. You received that as well. Acting Director of Finance, Caitlin Repause, Re-Information Report T-10-2024 Development Charges, Council Workshop. And so, again, it's just for receiving that information, so I need a mover. So, Councillor Trombetta, can I ask you to move receiving that information, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And Councillor Rayner, will you second that, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Okay, so again, it's just that the information report T-10-2024 regarding Development Charge Council Workshop be received for information. I don't know whether you have it in front of you, but that is it in simplicity. Are you good with that?
Yep.
Okay, so let's just do a show of hands again to receive that, please. And that also carries. Thank you. Okay, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, again. I just want to clarify that on June 10th at the planning meeting, that's when council will be considering the background study and proposed DC bylaws. Byron didn't have that exact date in his presentation, but it will be, it'll be going to the June 10th planning meeting. and then the actual final approval will be at July 15th. So that will give us some time. If at the June 10th meeting, there's changes that council wants to see, it'll provide additional time for us to make the changes.
Okay, that's great. All right, well, looking at that then, we are moving on. There are no communications. There are no new items of business that I'm aware of unless someone has one. Okay, seeing some shaking heads. There are no confidential. We do have to do a confirming bylaw, so does anyone have the agenda in front of them that they can actually do that? Okay, so Councillor Broderick has it in front of her open.
Moved by myself, Councillor Shelley Broderick. 1, that leave be granted to introduce bylaw number 2024-29, and that the same shall be considered to have been read a first, second, and third time with one reading and are hereby adopted. And 2, that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign and affix the corporate seal thereto, any rule of this council to the contrary notwithstanding. 8.1 Bylaw 2024-29, bylaw to adopt, confirm, and ratify matters dealt with by council resolution.
So Councillor Riley, can I ask you please to second that resolution? Thank you. Okay. And we'll use a show of hands again, please.
Any discussions?
On the bylaw?
Yes.
I wasn't asking for discussion. Do you have something you want to say about that, Councillor?
I'm just not really sure what the direction of this is for. Is this to just acknowledge that this meeting occurred tonight because it's still got a public hearing and there still could be some changes to it? So it's got nothing to do about solidifying everything that was shown tonight.
No.
It would just recognize that we've seen it tonight. Am I correct?
Correct. It says to adopt, confirm, and ratify matters dealt with by council resolution. That's the confirming bylaw that just says, yes, we've heard it, yes, we've had our training session, and we've received the information by both of those.
Okay, it just said matters that were dealt with. Well, we didn't totally deal with anything. It was theoretical thrown at us and we hadn't practically resolved it. So that's why I was a little concerned with that wording.
So I'm going to let the clerk answer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To the councillor, through you, Madam Mayor, the confirming bylaw essentially confirms the proceedings that took place at tonight's meeting and tonight's meeting only. There is no forecasting or confirming of any proceedings in the future.
All right, so what was discussed tonight is open subjectively or objectively to be reviewed and possibly changed, altered, or remain the same in future meetings that will be held in the public and thereafter before we finalize that with the bylaw, correct?
So, Councillor, that was what our interim CAO just said about the June 10th meeting.
Yes.
That is the next meeting where we will have, by then they'll work on this some more, we will have opportunity to look at it again at that point in time. This is
That
just...
will be the corrected final version brought forward to council for ratification at that time?
Yes, so this is actually a workshop session, and so we're just saying we've had it, we've heard the information, we've had the ability to ask questions.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. So can we just do a show of hands then, now that that's clear? Okay. Please vote. Thank you. Okay. And so I will adjourn this meeting at the hour of 8:56.